Hi, everyone. Thank you all so very much for coming today. And I'll just take a moment to thank a few people. First of all, and most of all, I want to thank Rachel Barold and Rachel Sachs for speaking to us today. They are very inspiring activists, and I hope they inspire you. I'd also like to thank our moderator, David Lopalato, who's hanging out in the back there. I'd like to thank our tech support crew, Chris Martin and Michelle Marshall. Thank you very much for helping us with technology. And I'd like to thank Jan McNamara, who helped me with every phase of planning and preparing for this event. And I would like to thank Sari for a wonderful sermon today. And as Sari mentioned, I do send out regular GVP emails that include advocacy invitations. So if you'd like to be on my email list, please talk to me after the forum. And now I'm going to turn it over to David and we'll get started.
Thank you, folks. Margaret asked me to be the moderator, and because she was hoping I could add a different perspective to this issue, but it's really her and her team. Do you want to talk about some of your team that do all the work? You don't want to take up the time, and so I would mention them, but I'm sure I would forget names. But so the whole St. John's and Moms Against Gun Violence, they're the real hard workers. So let's hear it for them. And then also our two guest speakers who I'll introduce in a moment. Margaret asked me to come again, hoping that I could add some perspective. I teach high school. I teach at BCC, and this year we had 2 lockdowns. Last year we had 2 other lockdowns. And what I want to talk about, I don't want to make BCC an example. I don't want to focus on the specifics of the BCC issue. All I want to do is, through those experiences, talk about how we've kind of entered from my perspective and from my students' perspective, we've kind of entered the Kafkaesque or the surreal stage of this discussion. And what I mean by that is just to give you an example, before a couple minutes ago, someone came up to me and said, "Did you hear Sari's sermon today?" Which I haven't yet. I'll go at 5 o'clock. And the person said it was a beautiful and impassioned call to advocate for gun violence. And what she meant was advocate against gun violence. And but that's where we're at right now. What I mean by that is we had a 4-hour lockdown at our school and then a week later we had an 1.5-hour lockdown. And afterwards we had parents talking to admin, demanding metal detectors in our schools. They didn't invite teachers to that discussion. They didn't invite students. It was parents and administrators. It was really surreal from a teacher perspective, why they wouldn't ask teachers and students, because any teacher or student would say that we have 30 doors that open to the outside at BCC. Metal detectors in one door won't work. And we were in lockdown for a gun in our community for that. It was 4 hours. Why I mentioned that is because it was a gun, it was a BCC student, don't get me wrong, but it was in the community. And I mentioned that because we have an elementary school, a Catholic elementary school across the street from BCC. And they were in lockdown for the same time that we were because of our lockdown. So imagine being in a classroom with kindergarten students for 4 hours where they have to be quiet. After that lockdown, we had this expert come from MCPS who was like trying to refresh our training and how to deal with lockdowns. And I kid you not, ask any BCC teacher. One of the BCC teachers asked, "Do we have to make sure the kids are quiet and hunkered down for 4 hours?" And this expert said, the expert was, she was brand new, very nervous. She said, "Why would you do that?" And that's what we're trained to do. And she had no idea that that was our training. And then another teacher asked, "My classroom is by the door. Can we just get out?" And she said, "Of course, get out." And which is totally violates all our training. And so we're in this Kafkaesque moment where we don't know what matters. And again, 4 hours. Um, we've heard parents say everything like metal detectors, which in our current situation wouldn't work. Other parents saying cell phones are the problem. But when you're on the floor with students for 4 hours, cell phones are the cell phones are the only way you're getting information. And so, and a week later, we had another lockdown, and the students just piled out of the school. I mean, they just left. And so our training just feels like it's not working. I mean, it's a moot point, our training right now. And so adding to the Kafkaesqueness is just like, we've been through this for, we memorialized the 25th year of Columbine last April. So this is the 26th year we've been talking about gun violence. When something like what happens at Newark with air traffic control, it's a national emergency, all hands on deck, let's fix it. When there's a shooting at a political rally, all hands on deck, let's fix it. And the will is just not there. And we're just getting worried that we're losing all the momentum. And so that's why I say it's just getting into this really weird stage where we just don't know what matters. And I can't blame students for just piling out of the school the second they hear there's another lockdown, even though that danger could be in the community. We just don't know what matters or what works at this point. And that's why we need to hear from our two speakers today, who I'll introduce in a moment. So our first speaker, we have two Rachels, both juniors. Our first, I'm going to introduce Rachel Sachs, and I'm going to go to the notes for just a second because I just met these two amazing students, and so I just want to make sure they already have this incredible. Both of them have these incredible resumes, and I don't want to mix them up because they're both named Rachel. So excuse me if while I read a little. So first, we're going to hear from Rachel Sachs, and she's a junior, going to be a senior next year, right? At BCC, they call themselves seniors the second the seniors leave the school. So I want to make sure that's clear. So she's a junior, senior next year, and she's at Georgetown Day School. And talking about the surrealness, she described that they have this gate where anyone driving into the campus has to get checked by a guard at the gate. But then she just informed us that there's another gate that has no security whatsoever. And so that's the place we're in. Rachel Sachs, she's a member of the Students Against Gun Violence Club. Rachel volunteers with Moms Demand Action, and she participated in advocacy days. And so each of our speakers is going to have 10 minutes to talk about their own experience, their own feelings. And I have a different question for both speakers, but I've asked Rachel Sachs to address the question. We were here in January in this very room. We had a state senator, a state delegate. We were really optimistic about two bills that were going to be in front of the Maryland Senate. One was to excise a tax on gun dealers, and the other one was to reinforce a law that was already there preventing perpetrators of domestic violence from getting their hands on guns. And neither of those bills passed. And a year ago, we had Senator Ward Stryker, whose bill did pass and became law, and then got weakened by federal judges. And so the question for Rachel Sachs is, and she'll come up and introduce herself, is how do you keep the faith? How do you not get discouraged by some of these legal setbacks? So let's hear it for Rachel Sachs.
Thank you, David, for your kind words. And thank you all so much for having me. I appreciate how many people have come out today to show their support and commitment to fighting gun violence. I'm also honored to be speaking in front of such a dedicated and hardworking community. I admire your St. John's Gun Violence Prevention Ministry and your mission statement to put love into action. It's inspiring how much hard work and dedication you've all put in. I also want to thank Margaret Hilton and Jam McNamara for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm honored to be speaking today on June 1st, 5 days before National Wear Orange Day. As you've probably noticed, we're wearing orange to honor Hadia Pendleton, a 15-year-old girl who was shot and killed by a stray bullet in Chicago. Tomorrow would have been her 27th birthday. Today, we wear the shirts in support of all victims of gun violence around the country. Unfortunately, stories such as Hadia's have become more and more common in recent decades. With a doubling in homicide rates for children and teens from 2013 to firearm-related injuries becoming the #1 cause of death for children and teens in the US, gun violence has reached epidemic levels. And for me, a 17-year-old girl who frequently explores in and around DC, being shot by a gun is my biggest fear. I walk to the metro with one AirPod in. I have nightmares of being chased by a shooter at night. And when I walk into my synagogue, I'm greeted by a police officer and reminded that I'm not always going to be safe. I've learned to accept the threat of gun violence as a real part of my life. Just last year, a mile from my house, there was a shooting at the Whedon Mall in the Dick's Sporting Goods. 3 years ago, my best friend had to take cover on the metro because there was an active shooter at Metro Center. And 18 years ago, my parents were held at gunpoint and robbed by 3 masked men in Los Angeles. I've learned to accept these incidents with guns as the reality of the country we live in. And while I stand here alone at this podium, I know I stand with countless other kids around the country that can all say the same. In my school, my neighborhood, my state, and my country, there are kids lying awake at night, thinking exactly what I think, that I might be next. And this explains exactly why I got involved with the issue of gun violence. Because I don't want my future children, my parents, or any other kid in this country to live in fear of being killed by a gun. How has my country become this way? And why has it been so hard to pass meaningful gun reform? My research took me back to 1977, the year the NRA first started making strides in American politics. Founded in 1871, the National Rifle Association wasn't always against gun regulations. In fact, the original goal was to promote proper and safe usage of firearms after the Civil War. They even supported legislation such as the National Firearms Act of 1934. But things changed in '77. Under the leadership of Wayne LaPierre, former Virginia delegate and turned NRA CEO, the organization began to shift their focus. They created the annual NRA convention and focused their money into political initiatives. They worked to redefine the Second Amendment as the right for every American to own their own firearm for self-defense, and not just that each state has a well-armed militia to protect against foreign invaders. Their lobbying gave rise to legislation such as the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986, which limited the federal government's ability to regulate gun owners. By the end of the 1980s, the Republican Party platform explicitly endorsed gun rights and solidified their strong stance for this new interpretation of the Second Amendment. Over the decades, the NRA has spent millions of dollars opposing hundreds of gun safety bills. Most notably, their efforts were one of the key reasons the 1994 assault weapons ban was allowed to lapse. They also were behind many of the devastating stand your ground laws that have allowed citizens to shoot first and not have to worry about the consequences. While lawsuits, most notably by New York Attorney General Letitia James, have helped expose illegal practices in the group and have hurt their ability to lobby as they once did, the gains they made, both nationally and on the state level, have been frustratingly difficult to roll back. In the past 30 years, there has only been one federal gun safety bill signed into Congress by Biden in 2022. This history has made its impact. As we all know, on December 14th, 2012, a mass shooting occurred at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Children and teachers sitting in a room, just like this room, were murdered by a deranged 20-year-old. On that day, my parents were driving me and my sister to my grandmother's house for winter break. I asked my mom to pull over along the next stop on the Merritt Parkway, just past the Newtown exit. When she stopped, she looked at the face of her 4-year-old daughter in the back seat. When we arrived at my grandmother's house, she turned on the TV to see the faces of 20 children, similar ages to me, that were murdered just 30 minutes from my grandmother's living room. 10 years later, and after no major federal gun legislation passed, yet again, I turned on the TV to see the faces of 19 students who were murdered in Uvalde, Texas. These were students just like me, dreaming of going to art school or being a marine biologist or a politician. In school the next day, our teachers arranged a conversation with the class to process our emotions. Some of my friends sat there crying. Some were angry, but all of us were wondering, how is it that our federal government is letting this happen? How is it possible that assault rifles like the AR-15, which were first designed for use in the military, are still being legally sold all over our country? And how is it possible that virtually nowhere else in the world is this legal, but here in the United States? Over the years, we've watched as more and more tragic headlines have flooded the media. So many, in fact, that they became too hard to remember. And all those lives faded into statistics. The 19 kids who were murdered in Uvalde represented just a tiny fraction of the 2,526 gun-related deaths in the US of children that year. I wish I had the time to say all their names for you out loud today, but I can't. So I'll read just a few. Nevaeh Alyssa Bravo, Jacqueline Cazares, Jose Manuel Flores Jr., Elia Amaya Garcia, Uzai Garcia, Jace Carmelo Yuvanos, Miranda Matias, Xavier Lopez, Jelaya Nicole Seguero, Rogelio Torres, McKenna Lee Errod, and Tess Marie Mata. Today, gun violence continues to cause injustices all around our country, and specifically here in Washington, D.C. 3 years ago, one of my favorite crossing guards from my school, Tony, was shot at Edmund Burke. It took him a year to recover from the shooting, and my school hosted a large celebration when he returned. Less than 2 weeks ago, Israeli embassy staffers Sela Migron and Yaron Lishinsky were shot and killed outside of the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. And just 2 blocks from here, at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School, the community was recently scared by locker shootdowns. When I was thinking back to my original question of why hasn't more gun reform been passed in the United States, a new question arose. Why haven't I done anything? This has led me to join the Maryland chapter of Moms Demand Action. With our current polarized and chaotic national government, the role of the state government in passing gun legislation has become more crucial than ever. And living in Maryland, we're lucky to be living in a state with a gun sense majority in office. This means that the majority of our elected officials support common sense gun safety measures. Therefore, our work lobbying for specific bills could have a direct impact on the legislation passed. In January, I went to the Maryland State House in Annapolis, along with Jan, Rachel, and Margaret, and spoke directly with our representatives about 3 gun safety bills that target things like the Glock switch and making it harder for those with a restraining order to buy a firearm. In talking to one of my district representatives, Jared Solomon, he explained that our work as lobbyists helps them to decide which issues they prioritize and directly impacts their decisions. Our work comes in many forms, such as introducing bills, educating legislators, giving testimony, and helping with gun sense candidate campaigns. And this work is needed now more than ever, since none of the 3 Maryland gun reform bills passed this term. I encourage you all not to stay silent, to use your voice to make change. Whether that be attending Advocacy Day in Annapolis or simply writing a letter to your state representative, your voice matters. The life of a child, and in fact, all Americans, depends on it. Speaking up also means having tough conversations with those who do not share your political viewpoints. Because the reality is, gun violence is not a Democratic or Republican issue, but a human rights issue. While there are widely different views on what the Second Amendment means, every American can agree that gun violence is awful and ending it should be all of our goals. So the next time you hear a neighbor or a family member make a questionable joke or comment, respectfully ask them to explain their viewpoint. Find ways to engage in civil discourse rather than letting the comments slip by. Because the power lies in these conversations between the people. Let's find ways to elevate these discussions so we can find productive outcomes and make positive change. Next year, I become a senior in high school, and after that, I'll be on my own in the world. When I think about the world I want to live in and raise my future kids in, I don't want it to be a place of violence and tragedy. I want to be able to not fear for my life when I'm in my synagogue. I want to sleep peacefully at night, and I want to walk to the metro with 2 AirPods in. I don't want my name to be on a poster at a protest or a newspaper headline or on a social media campaign. But what gives me hope is when I look around the room and I see how full it is. That I'm not alone in this battle against gun violence. That there are millions of us around the country that are all speaking up because they understand that America's gun epidemic is completely absurd, and we have the power to stop it. So I hope that you all continue to fight for the world that you want to see. Thank you.
Confession time. I have an ulterior motive for volunteering to do this. I'm working with students who are organizing a summer of teen events. They have an art show at American University, the museum you got to go to, and they're also organizing part of the Folklife Festival at the Smithsonian. And so when Margaret asked me if I wanted to be involved in this, I was thinking, maybe there's a potential for some of these talks to be at the Folklife Festival. If you're not familiar with the Folklife Festival, it's thousands of people right there on the mall, right between the Capitol and the White House. And could you imagine listening to these two in front? I mean, having Congress have to listen to these two in front of in front of thousands of people. It would be really moving. So if you guys are here in July, let me know. So I'll let you more know. Okay, so now we have the honor of listening to Rachel Barrel. She's a junior at Walt Whitman High School, where she serves as president of Students Demand Action, their local chapter. She helped double her chapter's membership and organize multiple events at her school. As an advocate for common sense gun policy, she spoke at the Maryland State Capitol on Moms Demand Action Advocacy Day. And the question for this, Rachel, is we're starting to see certain groups pivot from gun safety advocacy to really important issues, but that kind of are adjacent issues like how to de-escalate issues, like how to deal with toxic masculinity. And given how important those issues are, and why is it still important to keep the focus on gun safety advocacy? And that's Rachel's question. Okay, let's hear it for Rachel.
Alrighty, Rachel number 1 is a lot taller than me. Before I start, I want to thank David, Jan, Margaret, and Rachel number 1 for organizing this, for giving such an amazing speech. I've got a tough act to follow. So if we could just get one round of applause for all of the great organization. So thank you so much to you guys. All right, hold on. There we go. So I'm sure everyone here remembers the COVID-19 pandemic where we all stayed inside for 2 years. We wore masks, so I didn't see half of your faces. And the nation united around healthcare workers like my mom who saved lives tirelessly. But for coronavirus, we knew a way to stop the spread of unnecessary death. We got vaccinated, we got treated, and we found the solution. But what do we do for an epidemic of senseless violence that starts at American manufacturing sites and ends with the pull of a trigger? How can we get Americans to rally behind the cause of common sense? What is our way to stop the spread of mass death? It's students like Rachel and teachers like David who are able to give us the ability to advocate and to speak up against senseless violence. My name is Rachel Barold, and I'm a student at Walt Whitman High School. I grew up around here in Bethesda, the same place we call home, where weekends meant grabbing ice cream on Wisconsin Avenue just a few blocks down from here, or studying late at Connie Morella. It's the kind of place you feel safe. But the truth is, for people my age, safety isn't something we can take for granted anymore. Not at school, not at the mall, not anywhere. I've lived through lockdowns. I've sat in classrooms with the lights off, crouched under a desk, my heart pounding as an announcement came over the loudspeaker about a threat in the building. I've had friends hide in closets and whisper prayers. And even though, thankfully, it was just a drill and no gun was fired that day, I walk into school every morning knowing that it could happen to me. We all do. Just a few days ago, right here in DC, 2 young Israeli embassy workers, Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, were shot and killed outside the Capitol Jewish Museum. They weren't soldiers. They weren't in a war zone. They were advocating for peace and aid. They were just young professionals trying to make the world better. Yaron was about to propose. The ring was in his pocket. Sarah had just gotten a promotion. They were people like you and me, with dreams and futures stolen because someone with hate in his heart had a gun in his hand. That shooting made national news. But what about the others? The 14-year-old boy shot while riding his scooter in Southeast DC. The teenagers injured just blocks from a metro station that they took home every day. Gunfire echoes through DC and the DMV almost daily. This year alone, there have been over 80 homicides in the city. And in fact, that stat is outdated. I wrote this speech just a few days ago. It's now nearly 90, most from gun violence. DC averages nearly 2 shootings every day. And it's not just DC, it's everywhere. It's at Uvalde, it's at Parkland, it's at Oxford High School in Michigan. And it's at every school where kids rehearse, hiding in corners like it's part of the lesson plan. I have friends at BCC. I got texts that there was a gun in their area. I saw the video of a student handling a gun and putting his hand on the trigger. I know what it feels like. It's traumatizing, it's exhausting, and it's wrong. But it doesn't have to be this way. Gun violence isn't inevitable. It's something that has a solution, just like COVID-19. But it's time that we put our resources and our dedication into it. It's time that we find the vaccine against gun violence. It's time that we find the cure. It's a policy choice, and it's a policy choice that we have the power to change. Common sense gun laws aren't radical. It's in the name. They're common sense. Universal background checks, making sure every single gun sale, no matter where it happens, is being sold to someone who is of sound mind. universal gun checks have actually been shown to decrease gun violence dramatically by proving that people who handle and own guns are able to do so responsibly and safely. Look, guns are not something that we're getting rid of in America. Our Constitution prevents it. But something we can get rid of is the unsafety that surrounds the guns that we have in America today. Red flag laws, allowing family members or police to temporarily remove guns from people who show clear warning signs. These laws in Europe and other countries around the world have shown to decrease gun suicides and family homicides. Safe storage laws would have saved the junior at Kennedy High School who played on the football team who was killed because his friends and him were playing with a gun. Because no 8-year-old should find a loaded gun in the drawer, and no football player should be heading to his funeral at 16. Bans on assault weapons, which used to be in place in America, but now have lapsed, because no civilian needs a weapon designed for war. America is at a war with itself, but not the Civil War. It's a war against the death of our children. It's a war against common sense that the NRA wages every day, and funding for community programs that have been proven to work in cities like Baltimore, where gun violence is decreasing rapidly, to interrupt cycles of violence. We're not asking for anything extreme. We're asking for the right to go to school and come home at the end of the day. I'm asking for the right to feel safe walking down the street. We are asking for the right to live. Change starts with all of us, and I want to tell you exactly how you can help. First, it's easy to feel like you're drowning. It's easy to see the 3 laws that weren't passed in Maryland this year. But when you look deeper and you see that it wasn't just those 3 laws that weren't passed, it was the countless laws in Maryland which were introduced to our state legislature which would have rolled back gun violence laws. Our role at Advocacy Day wasn't just to advocate for the laws that we wanted passed. It was to advocate against the laws that would roll back unbelievably extremely successful gun violence laws. So here are 5 ways that we as a community can stand up. Number 1, show up. Join us at Moms Demand Action Advocacy Day in Annapolis. I just talked about how we lobbied against bills that would have rolled back protections. It's one day, but it matters. We see all of our lawmakers face to face, and we're able to tell them how we want to see the change in our community. This year, many people turned out in their red shirts that lawmakers couldn't walk through the building without seeing us. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to speak alongside people like Brooke Learman, our comptroller, at the rally beforehand. And I know that every word spoken at rallies like that in Maryland and across the country save lives. Every word that we speak, every time that we are able to challenge those who advocate against protections, we save lives. We passed stronger gun safety laws in Maryland over the last 10 years. We are privileged to live in a state where gun violence isn't tolerated, and we can speak up. We're not backing down. Second, contact your legislators. It sounds simple. You don't actually have to attend Advocacy Day to speak to your legislators. In fact, most of them from this area are unbelievably responsive. It's so powerful. They care what you have to say. We live in a state where zones are small enough that legislators only have to handle a small amount of people compared to other states where they handle many more. So we're lucky enough to have legislators that can hear our voices in a manner that truly matters. Lawmakers count every call, every email, and every message. If you don't know what to say, just tell them you care about gun safety and you expect them to do something about it. They work for you, not for themselves. Tell them you want to support universal background checks, red flag laws, assault weapon bans. Tell them you're a voter, or you will be very soon. and that you're paying attention. Third, volunteer. Me and Rachel are both part of Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action. If you don't have a chapter at your school, start one. Or if you're not in school, join Moms Demand Action. And even if you're a dad, you can join too. You don't have to give up all your free time. Even just an hour a week makes a difference. You can phone bank, register voters, post on social media. There's a place for everyone in this fight, and your voice matters. At my school, at Whitman, we've done countless things like letter writing and also making soul boxes to put on display to advocate against gun violence. Fourth, Rachel already told you to do this, but it's important to talk about it. It's not always easy, but it's necessary. Talk to your friends, your classmates, your neighbors. Gun violence shouldn't be something we only whisper about after another tragedy. We should have every gun violence victim on the national news. It's not just 2 Israeli embassy workers who were killed with a gun. It's thousands of children every year in America. These conversations change minds, and change minds change votes. This issue is a policy issue, and we as a community can change policy. Even if we don't have an election in Maryland this year, we have elections in the states surrounding us. You can write letters, you can phone bank. We can do everything we can. And finally, support survivors like Jan McNamara. Listen to their stories, amplify their voices. Remember that behind every statistic is a person who mattered. Survivors carry more than just scars. They carry the truth, and they carry urgency. Their stories have the power to break through the noise and force change. Follow organizations like Survivors Empowered. Show up for vigils. Let them know they're not alone, and neither are we. Everyone here in this room is one face that could make a difference. I know it's easy to feel helpless. It's easy to look at the 3 bills that weren't passed, but I encourage everyone to look at the progress that we have made. Homicides in Baltimore are decreasing dramatically. We prevented the passage of several bills that would have rolled back gun violence protections. We have made change. Every call, every conversation, every protest, and every vote, it all adds up. It all builds towards a future where kids like me don't have to sit on a cold tile floor during a lockdown and wonder if this is it. Yaron and Sarah deserved better. The junior at Kennedy High School deserved better. Teenagers shot on their way home from school deserved better. The kids at Sandy Hook and Parkland and Uvalde deserve better. We all do. We have a choice. Accept this gun violence pandemic or fight to change it. I'm choosing to fight, and I'm choosing to find the cure. I'm asking you to join me and join the cause for common sense.
Was this comfortable enough, or do you want me to pull up some chairs? Okay, great. We just heard from Rachel Barold, so you can, if you have questions for specific speakers, you can address them. Rachel B, is that okay? Okay, and then earlier we heard from Rachel Sachs, and if you have a question, yeah, Rachel S. Questions, radical ideas, we're open for all of it. We got 15 minutes. We have so much, we have so many resources in this room to that and great questions and great insights. We have people in this room who took on big tobacco many years ago, without calling people out. But we have people who know how to fight the big fight, and so let's hear radical ideas. Let's hear some questions. Again, Rachel S, Rachel B. Ask your questions. Michelle's got the mic. Just raise your hand if you want to ask a question.
I'm curious, you talked about getting text from someone at another school saying the shooting is happening. What are you finding with your classmates? Do they have the same level of dedication, of awareness? Because your generation is going to be in charge and not so long. And I wonder, is this very typical of folks in your schools? Or is there the same, what I call kind of, I just don't want to think about it with a lot of people, I think that, and I really appreciate both of your discussions, but especially yours on the what you did do in keeping rollbacks from happening. I think people forget that. But I'm just curious, what are you seeing with your peers of whether this is going to grow?
Yeah, so I'm here. So my friend who texted me, his name is David. He's a junior at BCC. We went to elementary school together. And he texted in our group chat complaining that he had been in lockdown for nearly 3 hours. But I think that it's not just kids like David who are complaining about being in lockdown for 3 hours. I'm lucky to go to a school where people are very aware of what's happening, and we're lucky to live in an area where people are concerned about this and people do believe in gun violence protections. And so I think that students in my generation are highly aware of this. We see constant graduations with 20 seats open for a classroom of elementary schoolers that were killed 12 years ago. And so I think that we are so exposed to this that we are ready to take on the challenge now that we're reaching an age where we can really advocate for ourselves. And special shout out to Whitman. I think that we have done a lot of work. Our former SDA president is back there, Max. And so I think that we're ready to take on the burden and to work with moms, demand action, and really make some policy change. And I think lawmakers especially are ready to hear our voices as well. If you want to.
For me, well, I was 4 when Sandy Hook happened. And so there was never a point in my life when I didn't experience a shooter lockdown drill, or I didn't think that I thought that school shootings were just a part of life, and this happens in every country. This has been happening for years. And I didn't realize that it's such a recent thing. And I think a lot of kids have kind of understood that this is just what's going to happen in their life and may not think that they have the power to change it right now. But I remember when we started the Students Against Gun Violence Club at Georgetown Day School. In the first meeting, we had 50 kids in the classroom. Everyone wanted to know what they could do to get involved. And so I'm sure there's like a real passion for ending gun violence, but there's just sort of a disconnect between what they can do. And so when I told people about Advocacy Day, I got 10 emails saying, how can I get involved? How can I help? So I think it's really just about raising awareness. What can we actually do? Because our voices matter so much as students, especially with our legislators. So I think it's spreading this awareness of what we can do as students to help with this cause.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Every time I hear the news and I see the pictures, I ask why. So we have, most everyone who speaks on the issue talks about how many and who, but I wonder who's collecting the data about the why. My sense is, at least in what I hear and what I've been exposed to, is that the why is glossed over. And so do you have a sense of who is collecting those data? Because that is where the interventions can be found, I believe. So thanks.
So when I think about the why, I think about the fact that in the past 30 years, there's only been one major federal gun bill passed. And I think the why really comes down to this access to guns and how easily people can obtain them, because there have always been people who have felt this sense of anger, like they want to kill people. But in recent decades, with the accessibility to guns, we're seeing this rise in school shootings. And I think the why can come down to a lot of the polarization in our federal government and inability of lawmakers to come together and understand that gun violence is not a political issue and it's really a human rights issue. It's for everyone. Saving the lives of children is for everyone. So I think it can come down to this tension in our federal government. And that's why I was saying I think it's really important that we start having conversations and start working on this issue of polarization because it affects all of the issues in our federal government right now. Is this polarization and disconnect. And I think there are a lot of reasons for the why. It's not just, we can't blame it all on the federal government, but I think it does play a large role. When you look at statistics of the US compared to all of the other developing countries, the US in gun homicide rates is way up here, and every other country is nowhere near the US. So I think it really is our federal government.
You mentioned about the nightmares you have and anxiety of the daily life. If there is one thing that local schools could implement to help reduce your anxiety, what do you think it would be?
So I think it's kind of hard to grasp a way that schools could specifically reduce our anxiety about this because honestly, a lot of school security measures don't work. Even if you do have like metal detectors, you can still get things through. Like David said, the BCC gun incident wasn't even in the school. And so I think that it's hard to pinpoint exactly what schools could do. But I do wish that schools would help us cultivate our advocacy and give us ways to speak out against this, and just generally assist us with protests, etc. But I think that the DMV schools generally do a very good job with this. It is heartbreaking to find out about incidents in the DMV, and there is, I think, a lot of support in schools, but there is some sort of anxiety that won't go away until our legislators act, and it is harder to access guns because once somebody has a gun and has a determination, there isn't a lot schools can do to stop them, and that's kind of where that anxiety comes from, in my experience.
I also appreciated how at my middle school we got together and talked about our emotions after Uvalde, and we came together as a school community to address this fear and this anger. And I think fostering these environments where we can talk about it, because I think every kid has this sense of fear inside of them and it won't go away. But having these environments where we can support each other is really helpful to me.
Thanks, Michelle. Good morning and thanks for being here. I really appreciate you guys being here. So I was unaware that there was a lockdown at BCC. And it reminded me that there, I guess, lockdowns going on all the time. I'm just not aware of. I don't have a kid in public school at the moment. So would it make sense to somehow let the larger community know when there's a lockdown? Because I think it's important that the rest of us know what is the burden on you guys. I mean, I was really struck by what you were talking about, the daily anxiety of these continued lockdowns. So would it make sense to publicize the lockdowns, or would that, do you think, encourage copycat people doing lockdowns?
So the BCC lockdown, that I think you guys had 2 lockdowns recently, right? Maybe 3? Okay, 2 in a week. I remember hearing about the first one through like a WTOP alert. And so I think that the way to find out about some of these lockdowns is unfortunately to track some of the local news. And it is also hard because especially if you don't have kids, like I found out about the second one through friends texting and saying, hey, there's an issue at BCC, and like this video of a student handling a gun was passed around. And so there's a lot of like interconnection there. but the local news does do a great job of covering stuff. And so if you follow along with, I think it's WTOP, ABC 7, I want to say is our local ABC. And they do tend to cover some of the lockdowns that are more extreme, especially the BCC2 lockdowns. They covered that a fair amount.
There is an inequality in the coverage.
Yes.
BCC, anything happens at BCC, Whitman, it's going to get media attention. Kennedy went through, a rough year and it didn't get nearly the attention that a BCC or Whitman does.
Yeah, a Kennedy student was literally killed by a gun, and the only place I could find it online was an Instagram post. So if the difference in coverage is kind of shown there, yeah.
There's a real- what schools get attention.
I'd just like to say thank you for coming here with so many ideas about what we can actually do, because I think that Kafkaesque feeling that you referred to, partially it feels at the moment like as citizens we're losing a lot of agency generally to influence outcomes in the country. So this idea of focusing locally, it was very valuable, I thought. I'm afraid I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say thanks for that. It makes me feel a bit more hopeful on this.
Margaret, do you want to close this up and talk about everyone involved in the organization? Let's hear it for
Aren't they amazing? We are so, so thankful. And yes, for those of you who have heard Sari's sermon, or if you haven't, he said, get in touch with me. Thank you, Sari, because I do send out regular emails. My emails are always, one of the things around you'll hear from me in December and January is please come to Advocacy Day. And you heard Rachel and Rachel say it, and it really does make a difference. As one of them said, sorry, I can't remember which, we're a relatively small state. And we really do have an impact. When we send an email, when we make a phone call, they are actually listening to us. And our legislators here, our state legislators from Montgomery County are supportive, but if you've ever been in hearings, it's very difficult for them, and there are definitely gun rights activists in our state, and there are our own state organizations like Maryland Shall Issue, which fought our concealed carry law. And so please talk to me, get on my email list, and I will be able to engage you in advocating here at the state level with our wonderful state legislators. And if there are no other questions, let's just give, here's Hans. Yes, also next Sunday afternoon in Germantown, right? There's a Wear Orange event, a Moms Demand Action Wear Orange event. And speaking of state legislators, they are often there at Wear Orange because they do support us. This is a great chance to show your numbers to Wear Orange, be part of a group talking to our legislators. And also at this Wear Orange event next Sunday, you're going to be hearing from survivors. And you can sign up for that event right here at this table right afterwards. You can also sign up to get involved with Moms Demand Action, and they also are sending out many advocacy opportunities all the time, all throughout the year, and events with survivors. It really is good, as one of the Rachel said, I think it was Rachel Barold, to hear from survivors, hear their stories, because this is what motivates us to act, and this is what motivates our legislators to act. And I thank Rachel and Rachel because I feel more motivated, although I also feel like crying because I just think it's a tragedy that our students these days, that they have to be afraid. Why should they have to be afraid to go to school? I think it's wrong. And so I ask you to join them and join me in this fight by joining Moms Demand Action or signing up for my email list. Thank you very much.